This chapter should not be very long, should not be very difficult to understand. Still, it's a very important chapter. We're going to talk about security and we are going to talk about permissions. As an Android developer, you will have to ensure that your applications have the appropriate permissions to do whatever they want, especially when they interact with other applications' data. You may also want to require permissions for other applications to use your data or your services, especially if you make them available for other components. So first we're going to talk about requesting permissions, and then we're going to talk about requiring permissions. The first thing you need to know that there is no permission requiring, there is no permission requesting in the Android emulator. So when it comes to testing, you will have to test with the real thing. And let's start with permission requesting. So you see that here I reopened a previous example, the Joshua application, and I'm going to open the Android manifest XML file. Here it is. At this point you should understand every pieces of this XML file. The application section, the activity section, the intent filters, and we're just going to add an item here, and it's going to be uses permission with one and only one attribute, which is Android name. And let's see here that we want the user to give us permission to use the camera. We're going to do android.permission.camera. That's it, that's all. So you probably know that there is a permissions tab right here. And now it's of course mentioning that I'm requesting this permission. So what is this doing? Well, very simply, when a user will install your application on his device, the user will be asked if he's willing to give the application the permission to, in this case here, use the camera. The user will not be asked the question each and every time he starts run the application, but only when he installs the application. And now, what if you use a service or you use some data, you use a device without asking permissions? Well, in this case, the application will receive a security exception. In one word, security exception. If your application catches this exception, the application in this case will understand that it cannot use this data, this piece of data of this device, and should react accordingly. And if you don't catch this exception, your application will just crashes. So every time you're using data that are out of your own application space, every time you're using a service, every time you're using a device, you have to ask yourself, should you ask permission? Here, you can maybe open this drop list and see the different permissions. You see that there are quite a bit. Usually they are pretty easy to understand, but maybe I should give you a short list. So if you want your application to access the camera, we've seen that it's android.permission.camera. Now if you want your application to make a network connection, in other words to use the internet, you are going to require an exception that is android.permission.internet. If you want to read from the contact book or make changes, it's going to be either android.permission.read_contacts or write_contacts if you want to write, add contacts or edit contacts. Same thing for the calendar, android.permission.read_calendar or write_calendar. If you want to record some audio, it is going to be android.permission.record_audio. If you want to have an accurate GPS location, that is, in other words, you will need to access fine-grained location information, you will use android.permission.access_fine_location. Now if you worry about the battery, you can get battery information, android.permission.battery_stats, STATS. And the last of my list here, if you want your application to connect to paired Bluetooth devices, you will need to use android.permission.bluetooth. But you see here that there are quite a bit more, and it would be interesting for you to go through that list quickly to have an idea of when you should require a permission from the user. Now let's see how to require permission. You're going to require permission if you're implementing a content provider's services that you are ready to share with other applications, or even data that you want to share with other applications. And that's what is called inbound security. And you will want to implement this inbound security for the privacy of the user, to make sure that the data contained in your application will only be accessed by other applications if the user is okay with that. It might also be a way for you, the developer, to make sure that another application will not mess up with your data or your service. Requesting a permission will be defined here as well in the Android manifest XML file with a new section, permission. We'll need to provide a name. We'll need to provide a label, and we'll need to provide a description. The first item here is a name, and it is actually the symbolic name of the permission. You can use whatever name you want, but usually you start with your application package name just to avoid conflicts. So here, com.voxisland. Let's say that you have implemented a Sudoku application, and you're going to require a permission just to see the scores. That's how I'm going to name this permission. Here the label. Here it should be something very short that is understandable by users. So it could be see scores simply. And you could also, of course, here use at string see scores, which is going to help for localization. And here in the description, same thing, can use a string. Let's say see scores and description, and that is going to be a bit longer, I would say, a description that is also understandable by your users. After requesting, let's see how to require permissions. This is something you're gonna need, especially if you are providing services to other components. You have a content provider, or you have data within your application that you're ready to share. That's called implementing inbound security. Why would you do that? Why would you need that? Maybe because you don't want other applications to mess up with your data, and maybe also you will want, or you will need, to protect the user's privacy, and you want the user to give an OK before another application can access your data. This is also something we're going to set up in the Android manifest file. We're going to add a permission section here with an Android name, with the Android label, and with an Android description. So let's go back on the Android name. Here you need to provide a symbolic name for the permission. You can use whatever name you want, but usually it's a good idea to start with your package name, in other words your application's Java namespace, just to avoid conflicts. So com.vox island. Let's say that you have developed a Sudoku application and you want to require a permission to access, so just to see the scores, the high scores. So let's name it C scores. Then you need a label for the permission, something short here that is understandable by the users. Let's do C scores. And you need also description, something a little bit longer that is also understandable by the user. Access to the scores, the high scores. And here the system is just complaining because I should not do that here. Of course I should use string, a resource here and here as well. Access to high scores. And this is gonna help for the localization. But it's still complaining because those resources, they don't really exist. So what we have done here is just indicating permissions. This is absolutely not enforcing permissions. And there are two ways to enforce permissions. The first one is with the manifest file and the other one is anywhere else, so in your code I would say. So let's start with the first method, enforcing permissions via the manifest. So we'll just go right here in the activity tag, and here we're going to say Android permission equal, and guess what, we're going to use our com.voxisland.sudoku.cscores. With this being done, no external component can access this activity unless they have this permission. Without the permission, if your component is an activity, it will not be started. If your component is a service, without the permission, it cannot be started, stopped, or bound to. And intent receivers will ignore all the messages sent via the send broadcast method unless the sender has the permission. And now let's see the second way to enforce permissions. It's going to be within your code, so we can go here for example, and we can use a method called check calling permissions, and here we're going to say com.voxisland.sudoku.cscores, and of course you can wrap that in a if, and here, this method is going to return either something that is permission granted or permission denied. So if you could call permission denied, then do whatever you have to do here. So this method is making sure that if this activity is called by another component, then this component has this permission, com.voxisland.sudoku.cscores. If not, you're going to do something very nasty here. And finally, let's talk about intents. You can include a permission when you call the send broadcast method. And this will mean that eligible receivers must hold that permission that you specified. So as you see, the implementation is quite simple, and what is a little bit more complex is actually designing your permissions, knowing what piece of information you want to protect.